Good afternoon and welcome to Resolutions for Recovery. This show is dedicated to the education and empowerment of substance use disorder, and really everyone should know what substance use disorder is, to recognize it in coworkers, with family members, and to really be able to perhaps be someone that can help in a crisis, as opposed to being ignorant to the facts of the disease. It is a disease of the mind, and we need to remember that. But the last few months, going into the summer now, we are talking about prevention, because we can all talk about the end result of substance use disorder, which, by the way, is a fatal progressive disease if left untreated. But we're going to concentrate on prevention, and we're going to concentrate on our kids and giving them a really happy, healthy summer. So my very favorite person, Kim Laube from Hugs, is here, who I just love working with you, because I think it's the best place to be is before we run into problems. You know, I not disclosing anything, but this morning I was on the phone with the family whose 17-year-old has blown a scholarship, has blown oil, and just wants to smoke pot. It's just pot.
Sure. You know, we hear that a lot, that it's just pot or just alcohol. And, you know, I can only hope that as we focus on prevention, as we are having these national conversations, that we really begin to see the value in prevention. The same as we see the value of prevention in heart disease, the same as we see the value of prevention in cancers and diabetes, all those different things. That my hope is that the more we talk about it, the less stigma there is, the more we begin to understand that this is a disease of the brain, that it is not a moral failure. And in fact, with the right tools and strategies, we really can make a difference with this thing.
Absolutely.
And the right knowledge. So it's really important that we have opportunities to talk like this, that we are talking with our policymakers, we're talking with our school districts, we're talking with our communities, and we keep talking. And because we need to keep planting seeds and getting good, clear, accurate information out there. And prevention is certainly an area of focus. I often say, I was just in Seattle, where I had a chance to listen to our then Surgeon General, who I absolutely adored. And you know, their stats, they show that prevention has a return rate for every dollar of it saves between $11 and $65.
For every dollar spent.
For every dollar spent in prevention, we say for every dollar spent in prevention, it equates to, we save $11 to $65 on the treatment side of the world.
So, you know, I'm going to just interrupt us there, because on that note to follow up with, when we talk about treatment in New York State, and whether it really doesn't matter what your thoughts on treatment is. However, I know for myself, I'll use myself as the example again. I paid for health coverage for my son. At some point in time, I had to put him on Medicaid because I couldn't access the treatment that I had paid for
all those years.
So when we talk about that, we talk about hundreds of thousands of people who get put onto Medicaid. So follow me as just a taxpayer. Let's take the human side out of it. As a taxpayer, as a working single mother, I struggle to pay for my health insurance. I pay my property taxes, my New York State taxes, my federal taxes. Then I get to also pay Medicaid. So I get to pay coverage for my son, and that just goes pure to profit for my commercial insurance company. And then I'm paying again, and that's on the backs of every New York State resident. They are paying for treatment that insurance companies so easily deny. So if we can spend $1 on prevention and save $65 on the other side and multiply that out by millions of dollars, that's a significant amount of money.
Let's make no mistake, substance use disorder is like all the other health issues. We're just backwards on health in our country, in our society. And we wind up teaching strategies to actually get healthier only after we diagnose symptoms.
Yes.
And after we diagnose disease. And so,
Only country in the world.
right? And so that's one of the areas of focus that I really want us to shift our conversation with. And you know, if on one end of the scale is disease and on the other end is health, you know, chances are we're somewhere in the middle. Just because we're free of disease does not make us incredibly at optimal health. And so our goal is to get folks to really embrace and get as close to that optimum health as they can. And, you know, through diet, through exercise, through good knowledge. And think about how many of the health strategies that we already have in place with our kids. We already began teaching. We taught them to wash their hands, right?
Yes.
We've taught them to cough into their elbow. We've taught them to brush your teeth and to wear seatbelts and to put sunblock on. There are many different ways we've taught them health. This conversation needs to take place as well. We need to have a conversation with kids about their chemical health, about about their health, long before they ever wind up into crisis on it.
Absolutely.
Now, that's the conversation. That's a hard conversation to have.
It's a
when
scary
do parents have it?
conversation
Right.
to have.
Yeah.
It's an uncomfortable
Sure.
conversation to have. Any conversation worth having is going to be out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
I remember with my younger son when President Clinton was involved with a certain young intern, and the fact that what she performed on him was not considered an act. I'm talking, but I remember my son and his friends standing in my kitchen talking about that. And as much as it embarrassed me and pained me, and certainly embarrassed them and pained them,
Absolutely.
we had a conversation about what that all meant.
Yeah.
Because you need to straighten
Absolutely.
things out.
You know, the thing that is so important that we almost kind of miss the boat on is that kids have a lot of information. They know drugs are bad. They know it. They've gotten it through kindergarten. Now, that doesn't mean that just because they have the knowledge base that drugs are bad, that they're going to make those decisions
Healthy decisions.
right,
Yeah.
that we want them to make. So we have to do better than just giving them the information. And oftentimes, because they're very clear that drugs are bad, we kind of minimize alcohol. Now, there's a lot of things, and you've touched on some of them that we kind of need to do better and different. One of the biggest mistakes we make, one of the most dangerous things we can say as parents, is it's just kids being kids. It's just kids being kids. And I hear parents say that all the time, and because I sit with focus groups with parents, and they're like, well, they're just doing it. They're just doing what all kids do. The challenge is our kids are dying.
Yeah.
And once we begin to get clear that our kids are dying, it's really important for us to stop and say, wait a second. We can't just keep passing this off as kids just being kids, because this is the end result that's happening.
Yeah.
And what we really need to begin to do is say, okay, what can we do differently? And what can we do differently now? Not wait for 5 to 10 years. And the challenge with prevention is it's hard to measure. We have science now that measures it, but those measurements come in a 5 to 10 year period, right?
Where lives are lost.
Yeah. And it becomes, and so it's hard for schools to get programs in, or, you know, we'll just write off, well, that program worked, that program didn't. It takes time to measure these things. What I do know is that we can't just leave it up to the schools, and we certainly can't just leave it up to the parents. And we have to make sure that we are having a comprehensive approach to this, where we're bringing in sectors of the community. And we can start with the 12 that the federal government suggests, because there are 12 sectors of the community, but there's also more than that.
Yes.
But it really becomes, as I joke and say, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. I can have my idea as an adult and as a mom and as a businesswoman in the community, but if I'm not sitting and talking to kids, how do I know how this is impacting them?
Correct.
Or if I'm not talking with clergy, well, how is this showing up in your churches and in your religion? If I'm not talking to the medical community, how are you guys seeing this? And the importance of community coalition is to bring us all together to talk about this problem together. One of the best examples, you know, I speak to about 25,000 kids a year, right? Travel all over the place. You share a lot of that time with me on stage. One of the things that I pride myself in knowing is I'm in touch with today's teen. I know what's going on with them. Well, one day we had kids kind of draw a map of their community, right? What their community looked like, what the different risk and protective factors were. And you know, of course, I'm an adult, so this is my business. I knew exactly what they were going to put on the paper long before they put on. So they show me the paper. Well, it wasn't just me. There was about, 100 of us in the room. one group of kids got up and said, this is our community, this is how we see it. They showed Main Street because they defined community as Main Street. They showed different significant people in the school, and I knew the people in the school, so I was glad to see that they saw them as protective factors. And then they drew a picture of two kids on the beach with a plastic bag. And I thought, oh, that's so cool because, you know, we're talking about the environment, keeping plastic bags. These kids are in touch with that. So I was like, hey guys, great you put the plastic bag on there. Great you showed us that we need to be more mindful of the environment. And they were like, oh no, Kim, that's not why the plastic bag was there. The plastic bag was there because it came from the local drugstore. And the local drugstore was the #1 place the kids were going and they were purchasing alcohol. Now, it was a pharmacy, it was a wellness center, it was a place that we were supposed to go for our health products, but it was also the #1 place where our young people were going, and that was their point of access. That was their point of sale. That was the place that they got it. So it becomes really important for us never to sit around as adults and say we have this answer, or never to look from just one vantage point. It really becomes important to how do we look at this from all the different lenses that are involved, and how do we bring key stakeholders and communities together to engage in this dialogue.
It's amazing when you do talk to kids because you can be an adult and try to pretend that you're a teenager again, but you can't because you have way too much knowledge now in your mind. So it's really hard. You can probably go back to how you felt during different stages, but not what they're thinking today.
And the game is different today.
And they are not. I was in Manhasset, so very wealthy community, prominent community, under a lot of stress because they are expected now. There is no going to be an apprenticeship for any of those kids. They're expected to go to college.
And
they're
good ones.
expected to be a student athlete, lacrosse, huge in the community, expected to excel on so many levels. And I spoke to 8 periods, so I spoke to a lot of kids. They're not having fun. I asked them all, are you guys having fun? Nobody's having fun. Do your parents think you're under pressure? No, they do not. Are you under pressure? Too much. So on the weekends, what do? They go blow off steam, they get high, they get drunk, they do whatever they have to do, and they're doing it during school because it's too much for them to handle. And parents need to freaking hear that once and for all. It's too much for them to process.
You know, as we speak with both parents and kids across the county, and not even just here in Suffolk County, as I travel, that this is a group of young people who have tremendous stress and anxiety, and we don't have those coping mechanisms to match up with it. It's okay that we're pushing our kids. It's okay because as our kids are kind of doing their thing, there are kids in other countries like sitting by candlelight studying to come over here. And so it's okay that we push our kids to do more and be more. And
Without
all
a doubt.
And to set a bar. And it's also very important and essential that we match the supports that they need to perform at that level. You know, there's no longer, you know, and we've set them up to be these high achievers, and that's okay. That's really important. But
especially if they are a high achiever.
Absolutely.
But you can't expect, you know, I knew my kids. I knew where they were comfortable. They never raised, if they were good at an 80 to an 85, and I asked them to keep it at an 85, I didn't ask them to get a 95 because that was unrealistic. Because then they were going to hate school. And you don't want them to hate school. So you need to identify where your child falls and be okay with who they are too.
And embrace their talents. We actually just did this trip to Florida, and we had met somebody in 2002, and then he was just beginning to tap into his art, his talent, and who he was. And so here we are in 2017. We show up on his doorstep 15 years later.
How old was he in 2002?
Oh, I don't know how old he is now, but however he was 50. So here's the deal. Like, here was a guy who was working for a company. Now he owns 3 galleries in the Florida Keys. He's working with my favorite artist in the whole entire world, doing this amazing stuff. But what's really important is he's now started to mentor kids. He's brought them in. He's got these kids who aren't necessarily following an academic, they're not on a trajectory to go off to 4 years of college. But because he's a community member, he wanted to make sure that these kids had an outlet. They had a way to express themselves.
Yes.
They had a way to deal with the stresses and the challenges they were having, and that they had a place that they felt connected to the community. Because one of the things we know is a tremendous protective factor is kids feeling connected and bonded to their community.
Yes.
The challenge in Suffolk County is so many of our kids won't be able to afford to be able to come back here, to live here. Hard to feel connected long-term to a community it's going to be hard to afford to live in.
Yes.
And how many of our families in Suffolk County are working 2, 3, 4 jobs just to afford to live here? And the amount of adult pressure that's on there that we often don't talk about.
Yes.
And how many families just really want to stay here, how much we party here, how much we socialize here with alcohol, that this really is an adult problem.
Yes.
And we've got to begin to just, again, take those hard looks at it. How do we give the families the support they need, give the schools the support they need, the communities? You'll always hear me talk about the 4 different areas. How do we help individual teens? How do we help communities? How do we help schools? And how do we help families? And when young people feel bonded in all 4 places, they're going to knock their lives out of the park. They're going to do some really good things.
But again, we always talk, and I know, the silos. We have to, as parents, be able to talk to one another. You know, if my son came home and said, oh, you know, Jordan Laube has measles, well, I'm going to call Kim Laube and I'm going to say, hey, what's going on? And that's going to be the buzz around.
Sure.
But nobody does it with substance use disorder. Because I know, I'll speak from my point of view, all of a sudden Thomas, all-American boy that everyone loved, what a great kid, became that bad kid.
Yeah.
Don't go near Tom. He's not good anymore. He was still good. He was sick.
Yeah. And he needed the right avenue. You know, for me, I look at, from my own experience, I was a kid who you didn't want your kids hanging out with. I was the bad influence. I was the kid who, probably was the one who had alcohol in my locker, and I probably introduced you to your first drink. That's just probably the way that it went.
I'm just saying, maybe.
I'm just saying. Now, the interesting thing is now I'm the person who parents want their kids to come talk to so they don't go down that road. So it's always interesting that now I'm entrusted with kids. Now, I was able to find recovery at a super young age. As a matter of fact, I got sober when I was 20. It wasn't even legal for me to drink, and I got sober, right? Now, that didn't happen. Recovery didn't just fall out of the air for me. For me, it was actually through the HUGS program that I even learned that there was an opportunity to be sober, that there was value in being sober. And not only that I got to learn that I was actually worth a different life, and I had value. Now, I didn't necessarily believe all that at first. I didn't know that's what I was learning, that's what I was teaching. But what they did was, I was on this very much the same way as we do today. Campsite, Shelter Island, 60 to 100 kids, depending on what weekend it is. Bring in outside speakers that come and talk to young people about real life stuff.
Yeah.
Talk about, hey, this is this thing called life we're all walking through, and here's some skills that we use to get there. But one of the things I found that I wasn't as different as I thought. I began to buy into this idea that I was less than, I was not like the other kids. I wasn't even dealt a hand in life. I had all these ideas about me, and I was pretty beaten down by the world, But for the first time, I learned that there was hope. And there was hope, and there was a place to go, and that quite possibly I could get there. Those were things that were foreign to me. I thought I was just going down this track, and I was always going to go down this track, and that was just my cross to bear.
And that was only in your mind.
Absolutely.
And you had nobody to share that with.
No.
How many kids in today's world don't have that to share with? And that's the scary part.
Mm-hmm. We need to create more avenues for kids to get, there's always a controversy. Do you bring a recovery speaker into school to speak? Do you not? And there's good and bad. I always say bring them in as long as it's part of a comprehensive program.
Yes.
Because one-shot deals are never going to have long-term. Correct. But if it's part of an overhaul comprehensive program, absolutely. And so as we begin to have these conversations, high school kids, middle school kids, they love hearing people's real deal stuff. That's why
Yes.
they love the personal story, because
Yes.
they want to know that what they're feeling is okay. That
Yes.
it's all this confusion, all this stuff that's going on where we all just kind of go about our lives. They want to make sure that, oh, wait a second, somebody else feels that way too. All right, something's not wrong with me. This is normal adolescence, and
Yes.
this is what it's like. And so it becomes really important to find those avenues, those programs, those skills that we
And a
can
go-to
begin to
person.
teach, and the go-to people.
You know, unfortunately, not all our kids
Mm-hmm.
have a great family life at home. You know, and that's no criticism, no judgment.
Just is.
It just is life. And we need to be able to identify them a little bit, you know, and that they have the freedom to say, wow, you know, you're lucky. That's not how it is at my house. And not to be ridiculed or judged by their peers.
Yeah. And it's so hard. You know, sometimes when we see kids who are identified as having concerns or problems or challenges, you know, they can't even see 5 to 10 years down the road.
They
but
can't see 10 minutes.
I can tell you, my favorite counselors, my favorite impact people, my favorite people who like just are going out and blazing paths in the world are the ones who had really
Tough.
challenging
Yes.
stuff happen in their life. You know, my story is no different from that. You know, I get to live in this gratitude and this, and I love what I do because I know where I came from. And
Yeah.
some of those years were really dark and not easy to walk through. And so part of my shedding a little light wherever I go today comes from that place. And I am in such gratitude that there was a program for me to begin, you know, despite whether I was learning it from home or not learning it from home. You know, parents tell me all the time, how do you get through to my kid? I'm like, don't tell him, tell the kid sitting next to him, right? You know, or if you want to get a message to your kids, send it through somebody else. Those other go-to people,
Yes.
you know, they hear it differently. So sometimes
Absolutely.
my kids will come home and they'll be like, you know what I heard from so-and-so? And now I know that I shared that same information with my children 10 times over, but they heard it differently from a different voice.
Without a doubt.
And so when I began to get that I wasn't the only person raising my kid, I needed this community to help me raise my kids, that was another light bulb moment that went off for me. And I encourage parents too, again, as you
I used
said.
to call my son's coach and say, you know, this is maybe you have a talk with him
Yep.
because he's going to listen to
hear
you.
different.
He's not hearing me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Does it matter? Does it need to come from me? Absolutely not. I want it to come from the best source that's going to be listened to. And the greatest example of that is even when I hired a tutor, I hired an honor student because they could speak to their peer in their language and
Where they
cut
got it.
through. They got it. They got it in 5 minutes as opposed to 50.
I want to talk for a second because you brought up sports and you brought up coaches, and there are a couple of things that I love letting folks know. You know, so we bought into this idea that we got to put our kids into sports to keep them away from trouble. We were told, we
they're
were very
safe.
clear.
They're very
We wanna
busy.
keep-
They're in sports, Kim.
And the truth is, actually, right now, if you look at the demographics of who's winding up in rehabs, they tend to be your athletes. They tend
Yes.
to be your football players, your lacrosse, your soccer. Bowlers, not so much. So bowling's so we encourage
Bowler's safe.
bowling.
How about golf?
Golf usually is too. But those team sports, which are phenomenal ways for kids to feel connected and part of, right? And we're all searching for that great, I feel part of something. They're also ones that wind up oftentimes engaging in a lot of high-risk behavior. And when we talk about that, we're specifically talking about drinking. So oftentimes that the athletes are having the party on a Friday or Saturday night, again, letting off steam, celebrating, drowning, however that goes.
Celebrating
but
and
it's that,
drowning their sorrows.
it's that it's that group mentality. And so now, not for all of them, they're not all going to wind up in rehab. They're not,
Correct.
make no mistake. But for 1 in 9 of them who began drinking under the age, we've just kickstarted their addiction.
Yes.
Innocently, very kind of doing the norm of what kids do, kids just being kids. But for 1 in 9, they just took off in their addiction. And so that becomes really important to look at. We also,
So on a team of 24 to 30 kids, three kids on that team will have a problem with addiction.
and we just fueled it.
Yeah.
And as I get to travel and I talk to coaches, college level coaches from Division I to Division III, they all say the same thing. We love Long Island kids. We love Long Island kids because they're incredible athletes, chances are they went for special training somewhere.
Yes.
They had individual privatized coaching, and they played competitively, and they love the Long Island Kid for that. But they talk about the downside of the Long Island Kid. And here's the
party
downside.
like a rock star.
They party incredibly. They say they always know where the party on campus is. It was a Long Island Kid who created it, who organized it, who supplied it, and was the life of it, you know? And so there's another price, and there's something we need to be talking about that. We also, there's some great work from John Underwood called From Life of an Athlete that talks about how one night of drinking negates 2 weeks peak performance training time. So one night of getting drunk, you've just taken away 2 weeks peak performance training time. Now this is true not only for our kids, I think about all of our adults who work with personal trainers or triathletes or going.
Yes.
One night of drinking takes away 2 weeks peak performance training
Dr.
time.
Delman was here, and he also said, you know, you go to a wedding, maybe you don't often drink, but you drink too much. On a Sunday night, that happens. It won't be Thursday till your brain is back to its original state.
Yeah.
It's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time. Twice as likely, if you one night of drinking, you're twice as likely to sustain an injury the next day. And now let's talk about that connection, right? So you're twice as, so team goes out and drinks, right? We'll just use the soccer team for this. They go out and they drink. Now they have a game the next day, or they have, you know, a scrimmage, whatever it is. They go out and now they get injured. Now what happens when they get injured? Oh, we give them prescription pain pills. So we are just looking at how we're feeling this. The day of, I'll just take an aspirin, are long gone.
You were lucky you got an aspirin.
You're lucky if you got an aspirin, right?
You really were lucky if you got an aspirin.
Yeah.
But very interesting, college level coaches, especially NCAA, are allowed to random drug test.
They are.
Why are we not
Sure.
including that in a high school athlete? Because when you go and have blood work done, which is required every other year, we could be stopping an awful lot of substance use.
You know, one of the things
Or at least identifying it.
We encourage schools all the time to take a look at what their policies are. What are their policies with their athletes, right? And not only what their policies are, how are they matching their actions to their policy? Because so many kids sign that code of conduct, so many parents sign behind it. And oftentimes in school, there's not enough follow-up, if any follow-up at all. And again, sometimes I think we have to get better at how we teach schools to deal with that follow-up. That they have this policy, but they don't necessarily know the best practices and standards into carrying that out. And so it really becomes important that they work with community members, with agencies that begin to say, you know what, it's going to be tough at first. It's going to be tough to stick to your policy.
Yes.
But when we begin to match science to policy, we're going to then see community change.
Absolutely. You have to take the star athlete out of the lineup 1 week for that never to happen again.
Yeah.
Never to have it happen again. And if a parent is signing a code of conduct, and that's made very well known to the parent and to the student, there's no recourse. You're right, as a school administrator, as the coach, you're going to get a lot of hassle. But that's okay.
And that's where we have to line up how our administration, our Board of Eds, our coaches, and our parents, how we begin to really get together. Because I know schools that have done a great job at benching kids, but their parents were suing the school districts. One of the young women lost a scholarship, right? And so it becomes really, the challenge becomes, and how do we all begin to really say, enough is enough?
How is that the school's fault that she lost her scholarship? Put the consequence on the person that the consequence is meant to be on. And maybe you just saved her life.
Yeah.
Because we talk about, you know, my son once said to me, at least I never got arrested. And I said, that would never have been the worst thing that could have happened. And it certainly now, that wouldn't be the worst thing that could have happened.
Again, I'm fortunate, you know, with a husband who is a retired police officer, because I was able to actually teach him the addiction side of it. I was able to give him a face on substance use disorder, so that it wasn't just somebody in the street that they were dealing with that was a headache, that he had a very human approach to his law enforcement on it. And so as he carried the message that he learned from me, he's actually had the opportunity now to arrest people And they've come back circle and they've been like, you know what, you arresting me was the best thing that could have happened to me. It helped me recognize my bottom, and you treated me like a human being. You treated me and
with dignity and respect.
Absolutely. And so again, we go back to any other medical disease. If somebody's acting out because of their health, we don't make them wrong or bad. We learn to deal with it, and we compassionately help them. We need to see this as the same exact way.
Do you think that schools will ever really fully buy into doing all, especially with the athletes? Yeah. Because, you know, we see so much right now that's happening on the field with injuries, with different things. And certainly then when you see it move on to college, first off, colleges do look at Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and all of those wonderful things because it still is a business. So if I have 3 students that are the same academically, but maybe my child, you know, goes a little bit further on athletics, but they're pain in the ass partier, they're not getting a ride. They're not getting the scholarship.
Yeah. You know, you started the question, do I really think schools will make a change? So here's what I do think. They don't call me Pollyanna for nothing, right? I am the queen of hope. I am too, right? But here's what I know. So I know there's the realist side. So, but what I do want to say is, we grew up in a time where you smoked everywhere.
Yes.
You smoked in airplanes, in hotels, in hospitals, in
restaurants.
You smoked everywhere.
In bathrooms.
Bathrooms, you know, and so I can tell you that look at the strides we have made with smoking. And that was a very concerted effort. We took a public health approach on it. We began to get everybody on board to get that this
Who did we really change, though? We changed the 5, 6, and 7-year-olds because they came home and begged their parents not to smoke anymore.
No. And parents at least reduced their smoking around their kids. And so we had some reduction. But now I can tell you, when you are around somebody who, you're just not used to it. We're just in Suffolk County, in New York and Suffolk County, we've made smoking so challenging that it's almost, and smokers will tell you, and I'm a recovering smoker myself, they will tell you that, you know, we're the bad guys, we're the, you know, and so it really, I can only hope that we did such an amazing job with that. And Suffolk County did brilliantly with it. We really used our tobacco money and put it to work in a gold standard kind of way. That my hope is that we may be sitting down the road from now and saying, okay, we finally got that it wasn't okay to let kids drink. We realized that 90% of anybody who has addiction, a substance use disorder, 90% began in their teen years. 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, innocently in a basement, in a
basement where parents say,
90%.
"Oh, you know what? I don't want them. They're gonna drink anyway when they go to college. I'm just getting them ready."
Right. And so if we stopped, we would never say as a society, well, 90% of anybody who has diabetes ate a Twinkie between the ages of 14, 15, 16. Because if that was the case, we would make sure teenagers never touched Twinkies.
Correct.
Well, we know that stat with alcohol. We know that it's the #1 drug of choice. We know that more kids die of alcohol than all the illegal drugs combined. We still have an alcohol epidemic in this country, and I know that so much of our focus and our conversation is about opiates, and it should be. And we need to also
keep that. It's just a quicker death with that.
We need to have that same conversation with alcohol.
We do, and we talk about alcohol. So we're coming into Memorial Day. Between Memorial Day and Labor Day,
100 deadliest days.
100, especially for our youth.
Yeah.
Out on the eastern end of Long Island, no drinking involved, and kids were killed.
Yeah.
Because they lost control because we're taking a young driver, inexperienced, speed, rain, weather, whatever.
Yeah.
Then throw in alcohol on top of that. And is it a surprise then?
Yeah. And here's what I want to tell parents as we're up against this prom and graduation season. These are nights of their lives. They're amazing things that we've worked so hard to get our kids to these moments. We've got to remember to even keep our clear boundaries about that, right? This isn't, it's important at the graduation parties not to just say, well, I'm just going to let all the kids at the party drink.
Right.
And that's a really tough conversation to have, but my gosh, we should be talking about that family policy long before they hit graduation.
Yes.
So it's really important to talk about, even at graduation parties, having separate coolers, because right now stuff that has an alcohol content looks very similar to stuff that doesn't have an alcohol content. And so it's really important, separate coolers, clearly marked over 21 for this cooler, and make sure that that's visible to where most of the adults are.
Correct.
It's also important that your adults role model good, positive behavior when it comes to alcohol. We're not saying we're against alcohol. We're not saying that alcohol is horrible. We also want to make sure that if a couple goes out, one person stays sober. This way,
Correct.
in case an emergency comes up, there's somebody that can drive and get behind that wheel.
There's someone that has to drive home anyway.
Yeah.
So even if there isn't an emergency, you can't tell your kids don't drink and drive if you're doing the same thing.
Here's what I also
In the world
want.
of Ubers,
Absolutely. It's so important
know.
to get a safe ride home. I also want to make sure that parents are very clear. You can allow your own child in Suffolk County. You can allow your own child to drink in your house. You have every right. You can't take your kid to somebody else's house and give them permission to drink. And you certainly can't let other kids drink on your property under the age of 21. Now, here's what's even more important about the social host law that often gets missed is, if you're home from college and you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, even if you're not home from college and if you are in control of your house, let's say mom and dad went out to dinner.
you don't have to be in control, because if you're 18 years old and home, right?
You're 18 years and you're the designated family member of the house, and that's how they
Yes.
define control. And there's underage drinking happening, you get held accountable by the Suffolk County social host law. And not often folks don't realize that even though they're not the parent, they still can be held accountable if there are minors drinking in that house. Now, and I got to tell you, Suffolk County Police, independent, small village police and town police, they're really starting to get themselves educated on the social host law, and they're beginning to understand that law enforcement plays a clear role in fighting this, right? And so now we need to make sure that, again, matching practice to policy to science, that we're having these conversations and these actions are taking place to really begin to save kids' lives. Because at the end, it's about creating those healthy communities, and it's about saving the 1 kid, the 2 kid, the 3 kid, the 4 kid, to make sure that at least as adults, we're doing our job. The New York State Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services a while ago had a campaign a couple of years back, and it was brilliant. And it was underage drinking, no minor problem. And it meant 2 things.
Right.
It meant that it wasn't a small problem, but it certainly wasn't up to the kids to fix. It's up to us as adults, as key leaders, as stakeholders, to begin to say enough is enough. Because how we did it is no longer working today. And if we haven't gotten that newsflash and that message, boy, I don't know what we're paying attention to, because the carnage of the war on drugs is playing out in every community tenfold.
But our children too, our youth, are not just drinking.
No.
They are pouring it into their eyes so that it's quickly absorbed into their mucous membranes. They soak tampons, and boys and girls put that in different places, that there's nothing on their breath, and it's the quickest way to get drunk. It's not just 10 people sharing a 6-pack behind the school. It's not, it's a different world.
It's a different game with different information and different products and in a different environment. One of the major
Bigger,
differences,
better, faster, stronger.
My guess is the parents raising kids today were not drinking with their parents.
Right.
Their parents weren't supplying it. We did such a great job of teaching them not to drink and drive.
Yes.
Now we got to take that to a different level and say, just don't drink. And not just say no, but really begin to create good, positive alternatives, to look at the science, to take a look at this thing that's glaring right in front of us and put words on it like we've never put words on it before.
And not to be so naive as to say, they're going off to college anyway. I want them to be prepared, because I'm sure the parents of the Penn State student, that all those other 8 boys that left him to die, that are being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, well, gee, I guess they were ready. They weren't ready because they still have the mentality of an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, and are not ready to handle life's events.
Having a Division I athlete in my house, my son being one, and just seeing, knowing how parents stood on Little League fields in the cold and the freezing, and lacrosse fields and football fields and all that, because we want that coveted scholarship. We want that opportunity, whether they play at the D1, D1 AA, 2 or 3 level. We want that opportunity for our kids to play at that secondary for a sports related family.
Yes.
It's not important to all families, but
Correct.
and especially a lot on Long Island, it is very important for it. And I just have watched it all go away because of decisions they make out of college. Almost all the time, they had alcohol at the core. And so I think about what it was like for the families that have lost kids, the families like yourself, the families of the community, the athletes, and just the impact that substances have on our overall society. And gosh, we could do better.
We have to do better. We have to do better. Not, but a lot of times, not all kids want to be that athlete, and they are forced into playing. Maybe
or they play through the pain.
And maybe they excel at baseball, but they'd really rather be in music. Yeah. But their parents are going to be, because parents are living vicariously through their children on a level that I have never seen in my life. You will do this. There's no option for it. My kids always had the option. If you join something, you're going to finish the season because you have a commitment to your teammates and everything, and a commitment to yourself.
Yeah.
You don't want to pursue that after that? That's okay.
Yeah.
I can tell you, my Andrew wrestled from the time he was in kindergarten, and in college he came home one day and said, I want to be a student. I don't want to be a wrestler who goes to school.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to get over because I spent every winter, it was so enjoyable to watch him wrestle. But it certainly wasn't my decision whether he continued doing it on that level.
One of the things our program on Shelter Island, and I love everything I do, but I especially love what we do on Shelter Island with kids, right?
It's such an incredible weekend.
And the really cool thing is that we have our athletes out there, but we have our student government kids out there. We have our kids who are in theater out there. Actually, this year we had a lot of theater kids out there, right? And so you have all these different walks of life. And what I love about what they're learning in that environment is, how can I use these tools to be a better student? How can I use these tools to be a better athlete? How can I use the tools that I'm learning here to help me succeed out there on the stage, or just in my interactions with other human beings? How does all of this that I'm learning here make me a better human being? And gosh, the one thing that I love about,
because you learn all different skills from different things that you do, that you bring back to the passion that you may have. And that's what, as adults, we need to really, a professional lacrosse goalie, Sal, and I don't remember Sal's last name, said to Thomas once, because Thomas was all lacrosse, he said, you should play football, you should wrestle, you should do all of those things, because the skills that you will learn, you will use and bring back to your passion. And you need to be a well-rounded person.
And
period.
That's when we begin to really get, it's not about what you do, right? It's really about what's in here, and how can you build that even better. And because, again, I've worked with enough kids who define themselves by their sport.
Yes.
And once you took the sport away, they had no idea who they were.
Yeah.
And my hope is that the more we talk about teaching kids to build themselves from the internal out,
the inside out,
we're going to be able to really make some strides. Because I sit around in recovery, I hear people talk regularly about how when they drank or drugged, it filled that void. This crazy idea. Let's fill the void on the front end. Let's begin to give kids the tools they need to identify who they are, look at their strengths, even increase those, even take a look at their weaknesses and say, hey, what can I learn from this? How can I do better? And how can I learn to navigate life on life's terms? Because life happens, and our kids deal with death, and they deal with losing a classmate, and they're dealing with suicide, and they have tremendous stuff on TV that impacts their life.
It's in weakness, or in when you fall down is when you find your strength. It's not, you don't find your strength in winning all the time.
Yeah.
But, they need to bring everything. Again, we go back to my statement that I wish every school district would say. We just need, our job is not to push out the most scholars. Our job is to create a well-adjusted, balanced young person who is ready for their next step in life. That's what it comes down to.
Ain't that grand?
And
let's hold that idea and that vision for our schools and for our kids moving forward.
Yes. Thank you, Kimmy.
You're welcome.
Have a great week. You know, just keep paying attention. We're going to keep talking about prevention right through the end of June, and maybe, just maybe, we'll have a different summer for some families here across our nation, never mind just here. We're in a crisis. We're in, you know, we need to change the way we conduct business, especially with our young people. Have a great week and a weekend. Take care.